Well, looks like we're mostly here, so we can get started. Plan for today is twofold. We're going to first do a follow-up writing activity addressing another major, not a major issue, but an issue with comma placement that I see pretty frequently come up in student writing. So we'll clear that up, and then the rest of the period will be used for continuing to make progress on the few assignments you have for the end of this book club unit. So you have your signpost worksheet that's due on Friday. You want to make sure you're filling out at least 3 of those signposts for that worksheet. And then you have your planning for your main book club essay. That essay, again, is due on March 5th. Okay. So let's begin. Today we'll be looking at appositives. Okay, so from what I gather, this should be new. I don't know if this is something you've addressed before, but it didn't seem so. So appositives, you see that word, it kind of sounds like opposite, which might help you understand it. For something to be in apposition with an A as opposed to opposition, this means 2 things that are like pushed up right next to each other, 2 things that are being compared. And that'll help you understand what this term is all about. Okay. So to get into our discussion about this, I'm going to give you this question. This is really why I'm having this mini lesson, is because this is an issue I see frequently in student writing. Okay. This sort of sentence in an intro paragraph. Moby Dick by Herman Melville is the story of why you should never learn to fish. So which one of these is right in terms of comma placement? Okay, where you have the commas over here, the A, B, or C. Which do you think is correct? You can put it in the chat, which you think is right. Interesting. So for the response is unanimous. Everyone is saying A or 1. And I have to tell you, this is a trick question. All of those are incorrect. Okay. This is how you would properly punctuate it. You would not put any commas around by Herman Melville, right? It's just plain fine like this. I think this is something that happens with commas sometimes. People get a little comma happy and they're not quite sure where to put them, so they're like, well, let me put more commas just to be safe. But in this case, you don't need them. And Leo, I have been fooled. Yeah, I'm going to explain why that is and hopefully help clear that up. Okay. So it has to do with a positive. So that mistake comes from thinking that the phrase by Herman Melville is in a positive. Even if you don't know the word appositive, that's what you're implicitly thinking there. So what is an appositive? An appositive is a phrase in a sentence that describes some noun. And it'll come immediately after that noun. It adds an additional description. And here's the key part. It's a description that renames the noun. So the main noun and the description are synonymous. They're interchangeable. Okay, it's extra information, a bonus description. So it's not necessary for understanding the sentence. Okay, so let's look at an example so we understand. Here's one from Lord of the Flies. Jack Merridew, that total psychopath, was nowhere near as reasonable as the island's first chief, Ralph. Okay. So the words in green are the appositives. Jack Merridew is the same as that total psychopath. Right? It's a description, but it's not needed for the sentence to make sense. You could delete it and say Jack Merridew was nowhere near as reasonable as the island's first chief, would still make sense. It's an extra bonus description. It's renaming Jack Merridew. Who is Jack Merridew? That total psychopath. So that's what an appositive is. Okay. Same thing with here. the island's first chief is one and the same as Ralph. Ralph here is renaming the island's first chief. So it's extra information. You don't need it. It's in a positive. You set that extra information off with commas. So, you could rephrase the sentence. That total psychopath was nowhere near as reasonable as the island's first chief, Ralph, and it would still make sense. Okay. So hopefully it's starting to make a little more sense. So let's look at a few more examples. So again, the key here is that appositives are extra. They're bonus. They're non-essential. You don't need them for the sentence to make sense. Okay. So here's my first example. Let's say, hypothetically, that I only have one cat. I have two, but for the sake of argument. If that were the case, let's say I want to tell you that my cat loves boxes, which he does. Okay, my cat loves boxes. I could write that, it would make sense. If I want to add in the name of my cat, Mochi, I can, but I don't need Mochi in there for the sentence to make sense. You would say, my cat, oh, well, Mr. Loveland's cat's Mochi, so it's fine. This is extra information. You can delete this, and the sentence will still make perfect sense. So because it's bonus information, it's in a positive, set it off with commas. By the way, speaking of my cats, here's a guest appearance from one of my other cats. Okay, and here's her in a box. Okay, so I do have two cats. Okay, so let's look at an example where the same sentence, but Mochi is the essential information this time. Okay. So my cat Mochi loves boxes. I have two cats, so you need to know that I'm talking about Mochi. If Mochi, this word, were not in here, then the sentence's meaning would change. Okay, if I just said my cat loves boxes, then it would be unclear. Am I talking about Tiny? Am I talking about Mochi? If you don't know, then the sentence could mean something totally different. So Mochi is essential information because it specifies which cat I'm talking about. Because it's essential information, because this meaning of the sentence would change if it weren't here, you don't put commas around it because the commas tell you it's not necessary information. Hopefully it's a little bit of a subtle distinction, but hopefully that makes sense. So here's another example. Say, I talked about the latest episode of WandaVision with my friend Matt. Okay. So that's all fine there. But then I can add in some positives. I talked about the latest episode of WandaVision, breaking the fourth wall. So like the latest episode of WandaVision and breaking the fourth wall, they're one and the same. They're equivalent. I don't need to add in the title, but I am, just so you know what the title is. And so set off with commas. Same thing with Matt here. Let's just say I've had multiple roommates in the past, but let's just say for argument's sake that I've only had one. So my old roommate and Matt are the same. So by giving the name, that's extra information. You set it off with commas. By the way, also, you might note that WandaVision is in italics. That's what you do for an entire TV show. If you're referring to it, you would italicize the title. For an individual episode of that TV show, you would put it in quotation marks. It was Agatha all along, yes. Okay, so I won't ask you to complete practice exercises on Canvas or anything, but let's just go through a few of these together so I can make sure you get it. So another Moby Dick sentence. Herman Melville, author of Moby Dick, really knew how to turn a phrase. So in this case, is it okay the way it is, or do we need to add commas? And if we do need to add commas, where should they go? You can either put it in the chat or raise your hand. Olivia, what do you think?
You need a comma after Melville and a comma after Moby Dick.
Perfect. So again, Herman Melville is equivalent to the author of Moby Dick. They're the same thing. So this is a restatement, a renaming of the noun. Therefore, it's extra. You could have the sentence, Herman Melville really knew how to turn a phrase. Be the same sentence, same meaning. So because it's extra, you set it off with commas. Okay, here's another example. I wonder if we'll get to see William Shakespeare's final play, The Tempest. Same thing, raise your hand or put it in the chat. Is it correct? Do you need a comma or commas? If so, where would you put them? Good, after play, you'd put in the comma. William Shakespeare wrote a bunch of plays, but he has only one final play. That's The Tempest. So Shakespeare's final play and The Tempest are equivalent. Tempest is extra information. It's in a positive. You set it aside with a comma. Next one, Mark Twain's novel Huck Finn is a real snooze fest. Sorry to any Mark Twain fans, but it's true. It's the only book I've ever really disliked teaching. But is this correct, incorrect? Are there commas needed? If so, where? Good, no commas needed. Yep, this one is fine. Why is that? Because Mark Twain wrote a whole bunch of novels. So if you deleted Huck Finn and it just said Mark Twain's novel is a real snooze fest, well, which novel? Tom Sawyer, Huck Finn, something else? We need to know Huck Finn is the book you're talking about, so that's essential. All right, last one, Frankenstein by Mary Shelley, the 1818 book, widely considered to be the first sci-fi novel, explores the dangers of unchecked scientific inquiry. This is kind of similar to the first example we looked at. So correct, incorrect, commas, where do they need to go? Good, after Shelley and after novel. So I'm trying to throw you off here because of the by Mary Shelley. So again, you wouldn't put a comma here. The appositive here is the entire phrase, the 1818 book widely considered to be the first sci-fi novel, right? That phrase is equivalent to Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. So that's the appositive. Okay, so hopefully that kind of makes sense. So no doubt in your book club essays, you're going to have a sentence that's, along the lines of The Life of Pi by Ian Martel is about blah, blah, blah. So in that case, just make sure around by and the author, you don't need to put commas. You only put commas in these cases around descriptions that are renaming the main noun. Okay. So that's just one additional new piece of comma usage. There are a whole lot of subtleties to them, but hopefully that's one mistake that you won't make again, or at least won't make as often. Any questions about appositives? Okay, great. So at this point, we'll break out and do independent work on our book club essay. Here's what I would recommend. Number one, if you still have not turned in your podcast, that was due at the beginning of the week, that's what you should spend the period working on. Okay, so focus on that first. I'm catching up on what you're missing. 2, on Friday coming up, you have the signpost worksheet due. Okay, I would work on that next. Once you finish up the signpost worksheet, then you could start planning your essay or continue planning it. So I would do those things. Number 1, make sure you finish your podcast. Number 2, complete the signpost worksheet, just posted in Canvas. Number 3, start planning your book club essay. The planner for that is in Canvas.